Now, before I go any further, you have to remember that after the Supreme Court banned school segregation in 1954, not everyone, including people like Bull Connor, the Commissioner of Public Safety for Birmingham, Alabama, just rolled over and accepted that ban. In fact, they threatened to shut the schools down rather than integrate them. And scores of white families who didn't like the idea of their kids commingling with black kids began to flee whatever schools were forcibly integrated en masse, leaving schools like the high school famously integrated in Little Rock, Arkansas, almost 100% black. This white flight birthed the Christian right movement and fueled their push to create private, sometimes church-sponsored schools that became taxpayer-funded private schools imposing religious doctrines to a select class of typically middle-class or upper-class white students. These were more commonly known as segregation academies. And they became really common because the federal government helped enforce strict plans like busing and denying tax-free status to whites-only schools to continue combating segregation, which brings us to today. It's important to understand what the Department of Education does for you and your kids. Among the things it does is student lending, Pell Grants, something called IDEA, which is basically federal funding for families with children with disabilities, and Title I, which is funding used solely to ensure that all kids, regardless of income, can acquire a quality education. And they keep civil rights data on things like the levels of racial integration in schools. All of that is in danger. Trump's henchmen want to eliminate the Department of Education. They want to create block grants to funnel tax dollars to private and religious schools to basically make white flight a taxpayer-funded benefit. They want to scale back enforcement of civil rights laws like Title IX, which prohibits gender-based discrimination. They want to enact a Parents' Bill of Rights modeled on Moms for Liberty, the book banning group. They want to take federal funding away from schools with curricula, books, or classes that address race, racism, gender, and sexuality. They want to eliminate school administrator positions that oversee DEI initiatives, resurrect the discredited 1776 Commission with the single goal of restoring, quote unquote, patriotic education in schools, North Korea style. Far more sinister is what's buried deep within Project 2025, which any public school should care about. They want to mandate that all students in schools receiving federal funding must complete the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. In plain English, that's a military entrance exam. You heard me right. They want to require your kids to take a military entrance exam. If you flip to page 134 of the 900-page Project 2025 manifesto, you'll read this proposal, and I quote, "To improve military recruiters' access to secondary schools and require the completion of the Armed Services and Vocational Aptitude Battery, the military entrance examination, by all students in schools that receive federal funding." And guess who would be exempt from that requirement since they don't get federal funds? Private school kids. You feel me now?
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so good to have you here. Welcome to this is our fourth webinar in our series covering Project 2025. And tonight we're talking about what happens to us, what happens to all Americans, but what happens specifically to Black people if the Department of Education is eliminated. I am Reverend Dr. Susan Smith. I'm the Director of the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development.
And I'm Reverend Marcus Tabb, the Assistant Director of the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development. And tonight we want to welcome you to our webinar where we will be exploring how the implementation of Project 2025 will affect all Americans, but specifically Black Americans.
Thanks, Marcus. And by now, I know, or I hope, most of you have heard about Project 2025, but we at the Proctor organization want to provide you with as much information as possible as Election Day gets closer. There is so much at stake. And so to do that, we are honored to have two knowledgeable guests who will provide information. Our first guest is Dr. Karen Bradford. Dr. Bradford serves as a strategic educational consultant to school superintendents, school principals, and nonprofit leaders nationwide. As a special education teacher, Dr. Bradford served in public education for more than 22 years in Tennessee, Florida, Ohio, South Carolina, and Virginia, culminating her K-12 journey as a director of special education. In 2010, Dr. Bradford earned coaching credentials through the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching and has accumulated approximately 36,000 coaching hours in the field. She served as the state systemic improvement team leader and state transformation coach for the South Carolina Department of Education. In other words, she knows what she's talking about. Welcome, Dr. Bradford. Our other presenter is my friend, but a very bad sister, Miss Tyra Mariani. She is the founder and the principal of Up Advisors LLC, a firm that provides executive leadership coaching and strategic advising services to help her clients create results for themselves and for their teams. Throughout her 25 years working across multiple sectors and organizational structures, Tyra gained firsthand experience on the challenges and benefits of leading and working in dynamic environments and managing change within those environments. She was the president of the Schultz Family Foundation, where she assisted Sherry and Howard Schultz in accelerating the family's work to address inequality by unlocking greater opportunities for individuals and communities facing obstacles to economic and social mobility. She was also president and chief operating officer of New America, and she served in several leadership roles across the education sector, ranging from government under the Obama administration to nonprofit and district leadership. We are blessed and honored to have both of you here. Thank you so much. And so we're going to ask Tyra to start us off. Tyra.
Thank you, Reverend Sue, and thank you to the Proctor Conference for inviting us to this critical conversation. Pleased to be with you all this evening. I am going to attempt to share my slides. And if things show correctly, you are seeing this, yes?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, first, the hard part. The hardest part is over. So first I want to start, I don't want to assume that, as Reverend Sue noted, everyone understands what Project 2025 is. So I want to start with just a brief word about this. I know that there is a prior webinar that you should tune into that describes this in a lot more detail than I will this evening at the higher level. But again, wanted to just start on a grounding of folks understanding what are we talking about. In fact, I can admit that Reverend Sue reached out to me before I had heard of it. And I said, what is this? And she said, oh, you have to know. And then the more I knew, the more I knew that I had to really dig in and understand this. And it makes our upcoming elections all the more critical because of it. So what is Project 2025? It is what I think of as many have called a federal policy agenda that is being led by the far right wing. And it is well-funded, 8-figure, well-funded project that sits in or being led out of the Heritage Foundation, which is also known as a right-wing organization in terms of their ideology. And they put together, most of the individuals I should mention also came from the Trump administration, the former administration, who have led the development of this federal policy plan. And it includes a 900, yes, I said 900 page document that is considered the manifesto in terms of what the policy agenda will be for the next administration, if it is the Trump administration. And it covers anything that you can think of, from immigration to education, which is obviously where we'll dive deep tonight, to, quote unquote, wokeism, to economics, you name it. And it really is an attack on our democracy. And it's something that anyone who cares about what is happening in this country, especially Black people, to know about this critical project, which again is really an attack on our democracy. It is divided into sections. There are many organizations who have taken the time, thankfully, in case you don't want to read 900 pages, to break down what this says. That is what we will do with the next hour that we have together. But if you really wanted to dig into some of the details to say, does it really say that? I encourage you to go online, just do an internet search for Project 2025. It's probably the first thing that will come up, is your ability to click and really read this plan in detail. So again, there is a whole chapter devoted to education, and Dr. Bradford and I are going to explain what that means, hopefully in plain language, but where we neglect to do that because we are experts in education, we hope that you will use the chat and whatnot to call us on any acronyms that we may throw out inadvertently. So the other thing I want to start with, having worked at the federal level under the Obama administration and actually currently under the Biden administration temporarily, is just to ground us also in the fact of, what does the Department of Education do? And it may seem obvious, but I actually don't think it's obvious at all. I will tell you that as one who worked at the federal level several years ago, it really took being inside the department to understand the breadth and depth of what the department does. I used to say, having worked at the local level in Chicago, that I understood how to implement the policies, the federal policies that came down, but I didn't understand the sausage making itself. And so I think it's also important for us to understand what things start at the federal level and which things don't, for example. So as was noted, the Department of Education itself is actually fairly new. It was started around 1980, and it existed. There were pieces of education, if you will, that existed across the executive branch. So the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, had a piece. Department of Indian Affairs had a piece. And so because of the goal to the mission of the department, which I have in front of you, to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. This really started to recognize, it started after the Civil Rights Act, of course, of '64, and was really about addressing the inequalities that existed within and across Black and Brown communities. And so a lot of the attacks that you will see on the Department of Education, I would offer, come from this desire and recognizing that in the anti-DEI movement that we're seeing today, anything that attempts to recognize that the playing field is not level, that the starting line is not the same for all communities, is really an attack on allowing equitable opportunity and outcomes for certain populations of communities. So the department largely does four things, and these are actually directly from their website. It establishes policies on federal financial aid for education, and then it distributes and monitors those funds. This is something that starts from early learning. If you're probably familiar with the Head Start program, very, very popular and well-known program that still exists today. Many folks can credit their being where they were today because of the early Head Start program. And it goes all the way through what we call post-secondary, or anything that's after high school, including anything that happens in the workforce development space, to college, to any kind of career or technical training. And so the department really decides how those funds, what they're meant for, how they will get distributed, and then also ensuring proper use of those funds. They also collect data on America's schools and disseminating research. There is the Office of Civil Rights in particular, for example, does a survey to look at whether or not, for example, Black kids are disproportionately being assigned or designated as being special ed students or students with disabilities. They will look at whether or not there are achievement gaps, for example, between Black and white students. So a lot of the data you hear about either achievement gaps or who's going to college, what's happening on anything related to the education system actually starts at the federal level. And there's also a desire to focus national attention on key education issues. This is really unique to any political administration. Or do they want to really focus on early learning? Do they really want to focus on math, the importance of going to college, et cetera? That's something that also happens at the federal level. And then also, equally, if not most importantly, is prohibiting discrimination and ensuring equal access to education. So this is ensuring, for example, that students with disabilities get access to the least restrictive environments, for example, that they're not put into a classroom on their own and they're not mixing in with the general population, for example. If there's any kind of discrimination that's happening that violates a student or a family's civil rights, there is the Office of Civil Rights that investigates any complaints or claims of discrimination. So as you can see, very wide-ranging, issuing out billions and billions of dollars to tracking data, making sure we know it's important, and protecting the rights of all students. And I am. So what does it relate? How does Project 2025 and the plans for the department come together? Well, quite simply said, there is a desire to eliminate the department altogether, that there is not a need for the department. There are claims that the department has overreached in terms of its authority. So at its base level, in its simplest terms, is a desire to cut the education department. Some of the things that they want to do, to give you examples here, are cutting federal loan programs that help college students and graduate students, anything related to immigrants in terms of helping them to be successful with respect to education, particularly higher education. This plan calls for the elimination of that. In particular, on the federal loans, for example, there is a loan that's called the PLUS loan. Some of you may be familiar with that. Is a loan that parents can take out on behalf of their children to go to college. They want to eliminate that. There's Title IX. There's been a lot of controversy around Title IX, which is to protect against discrimination on the basis of gender. So a lot of protections for LGBTQ plus students in schools come through Title IX. There's a desire to get rid of that. All of the things that you're seeing about anti-CRT, anti-DI, they want to eliminate. So the same way that you've seen states like Florida, for example, ban books, you can expect that this would happen on a federal level. Anything that attempts to tell the truth about Black and Brown lives, the history of this country, really a more complete examination of who we are, that would also be eliminated. You probably get the point of where we're going here, which is really eliminating rights and protections and anything that creates opportunity for certain communities. Another, just to give you a sense of another couple, and I won't go on too much longer, but setting up a parental savings account. That may sound good. I think it does at first blush. Certainly, except education can be expensive. How do we help to save? This really is about pulling money from public schools and enabling parents to send their students to religious institutions. It allows them also to get involved in classroom discussions, anything that may be discussed that students may want to discuss privately with their teachers related to their sexual orientation, perhaps how they identify, that would also be on the table for disclosure to the parents. So on the one hand, it sounds like lots of support for parents, but it really is about defunding public schools and allowing those funds to go to private schools and religious schools in particular. You can imagine, given what I've described thus far, that you will see less money going to historically Black colleges and universities, as well as tribally controlled colleges. And I've already spoken to the vouchers. So really, really devastating plan that I would say is regressive in terms of our progress as a country, and is the reason that the Proctor Conference is holding such conversations and holding tables today, so that you can understand exactly how important and how high stakes this election is. Let me turn it over, to my colleague, Dr. Bradford.
Thanks. And before Dr. Bradford gets started, I just wanted to say thank you for this, the fine details of this, because one of the things, if you listen carefully, you heard that throughout this document, you see anti-woke. You see they don't want DEI, they don't want critical race theory, and you notice that it has a slant. It has a slant, as Tyra brought out. And Russell Volt, who is one of the authors of the document, actually said out loud in an interview, he said, what we want to do is get rid of multiculturalism. So that's very important for you to know as you're listening to these conversations. The whole idea of there being liberty and justice for all is not something that everybody embraces. And so this document is trying, when they say make America great again, it's make America like it was before more people had more opportunities like they have today. So thank you very much, Tyra, for bringing out those details. As you were writing, I said, as you were talking, I was saying, oh my gosh, this is so good, because these are the things that people need to know. So thank you. Thank you. Dr. Bradford.
Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and continue. And I want to go to the other end of the continuum, thinking about grassroots in the classroom. So thinking about children, classrooms, communities, churches, right? So when we think about the impact of these dollars, I really wanted us to look at it from the funding lens. So Tyra really laid it at the foundation for us of what the purpose and the function and the role of those funds are from the federal government down. But when I sat as a director of special education, this was the itemization sheet that I had to think about, right? And so I wanted us to see the impact in numbers, the millions of students that will be impacted if we think about the U.S. Department of Education being eliminated. And I just want to give us just a snapshot. Hopefully we have a time for me to annotate these just so you understand what each of these titled funds do. We think about those Title I funds. Again, it's those high need, low income schools that really need the extra support and services. When we think about taking those dollars away, this means that those students may not get the additional resources for classrooms, services, occupational therapy. I was getting ready to go into my acronyms. I had to remember, not OT, but occupational therapy, speech therapy, even just the extension of the multi-tiered systems of supports. Well, what does that mean? That means that when students are having difficulty in classrooms, I'm the reading specialist, they typically pull those students out of class to give them additional intervention so that they can return back to the classroom with their students. Title I funds typically support these types of situations, in addition to giving additional coaching supports to teachers in classrooms. Title II funds do the same thing, but they add on school administrators. Our school administrators, think about your assistant principals, of course, our lead principals, and any instructional coaching staff that supports the instruction in the classroom. those teachers, those coaches would be taken away. That's how their salaries are paid, are from these funds. Title III are our English language learners. Know that they're not typically our Black students, but having worked at the State Department of Education, that was the department that I was connected to from the Office of Special Education. I had to partner with them to ensure that we not only advocated for example, those Black males who are overrepresented in special education classrooms, we also had to partner to say, well, how we're going to advocate in the same vein for those English language learners who are coming to our country to receive those same services. I'm glad I remembered this as Tyra was talking about the funding. It was one word you said, and I wrote 21st century. So I'm glad I remembered, because how many communities do we have that have funding? Think about our churches. Think about community nonprofits that receive 21st century funding for those after-school programs. That would be impacted. There would be no more sending your children or your children from your churches to these after-school programs to receive additional reading supports and lessons and activities to support them. Those funds come from this particular Title IV, the state innovation and local flexibility, thinking about, again, highlighting those particular high need, think about your bottom third of the schools around the United States, particularly what comes to mind in my most recent experience is Mississippi. Mississippi has done a phenomenal job of using Title V funds, millions and millions of dollars, to support literacy initiatives in the state. So much so that a lot of the edtech companies are mirroring what Mississippi did with federal funds with corporate dollars in classrooms. So think about that. How impactful is that if Mississippi were to never receive those millions of dollars to support their state initiatives? And then our last two, of course, the same as with our Title III, Title VI funding goes towards our students who come from those Native communities that need the same additional support and services. And then that impact aid really supports those federal lands, thinking about military installations and things of that support. And so I wanted to ensure that we saw clearly, after we talk about critical race theory, after we talk about the high level LGBTQ rights, we're talking about children in classrooms, teachers teaching lessons, paraprofessionals who come in and stay after school, who pull those groups while other teachers are teaching. We're thinking about those churches who are partnering with the schools to receive those funds to ensure that when those children get to after school program, that they have snacks in the afternoon and they're able to get their lesson, as we say in the South and South Carolina. You need to get your lesson. That means have a seat, be able to function and be able to learn in a different environment before they go home at night. So that's the impact. You can go on to the next slide, because I don't want to belabor the point, but I really wanted to make sure that after that, I sit at now serving, I think Prince George's County is one of the district is maybe the 8th largest district in the United States. And I serve all 150 elementary schools at this moment. Prince George's County is 98% Black. Okay, so when we look at these statistics, wherever you may be in the United States, this is an indication of how it looks today. I pulled this data today, this afternoon, so it could be fresh for us. When we think about preschoolers, and I know that Head Start is not technically in the Department of Education, but it's our related sister office. And I wanted for us to see the continuum from the crib all the way up to college. When we think about our preschoolers, only 54% right now are currently receiving services from Head Start. And when we take away the Head Start funding that's already there, we're going to double the impact of them not receiving services. Now, let's be clear. Head Start means if you have a grandchild, if you have a grandniece who is receiving services at 2 and 3 years old, perhaps they have ear implants, right? And they're having to go with their parent into the schools to receive funding. They're not in school yet, but they need to receive those services in schools. Those are those title funds that we were just talking about that can be pulled. And in addition, we don't even have currently enough Head Start sites in our neighborhoods to serve.
Mm.
So we're further hurting our communities by not ensuring that we advocate for our children, especially at such a young age. When we go look at the second bullet, this is the most current data because we know that typically the National Office of Educational Progress is 2 years behind, has a lag of 2 years behind. So just 2022, our third grades have already dropped 7 points on reading. Again, those Title I funds support our students when they're pulled out of classrooms to ensure that they get small group instruction so that they can return and hopefully return back to grade level. It takes students typically 2 years to return back to grade level once they've fallen off. And we're saying since we've come out of COVID and been going back into classrooms, our students have fallen 7 percentage points on assessments. So we want to ensure that if we're thinking about going to the box, this is what it means for our vote, us putting our vote. This is how it's going to impact us if we're not spreading the word. The third bullet speaks to special education, which is my jam. That's what I've done. And I love supporting students with disabilities and their families. And those are students who not only receiving academic support, but they're also receiving behavioral support, particularly for Black students and Black families. Autism is what we're hearing most prevalent these days. Why? For us, because we lack supports. I wrote down, because I didn't want to forget. I just happened to, sometimes we join these Facebook groups and I just happen to be in a group and sometimes I can't respond just because of the position I hold. And there was this one Facebook group where Black mothers, young mothers were saying, I don't know what to do with my toddler. I'm having to take them to get applied behavioral analysis therapy supports at 3 and 4. What that tells me as a director of special education, oh, wow. So we're not providing enough structure and supports at home. There's not enough wraparound services at schools, title funds to support our babies. It all has an impact. And then finally, I thought this was very alarming because I've never seen this statistic before. But as of late 2023, when we think about our Black high school students graduating on time, we are now seeing a trend of not only are they not graduating on time, they're taking 5 years, which is typically that year out, you're not necessarily supporting the high school student because they're going on to the next level, whether it be college, career, or the military, but they're now they were missing school at about 4 times a year previously. Now it's doubled. Chronic absenteeism has multiplied. How does that impact? Because the fundings for the wraparound supports that comes from Title I and some of those other title funds are impacted. They're not able to support the students when they come to school. So it all impacts the work that educators and administrators and district professionals and superintendents do on a day-to-day basis. And so when we think about Project 2025 and the mere fact that they think that them removing funds and not supporting our students is okay, and us as Black folks not having a voice to really match and speak up and advocate for our students is very alarming. And so I want to posit to us today, please use this information as you go back into your communities to support our students, to support families, to support our schools as we think about the possibility of Project 2025 and the impact to our public education. I'll turn it back over to you, Reverend Susan. I appreciate the time. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay. Thank you so much. There's so much to this. And as I'm listening to you, I'm also recalling how I have heard or read where some lawmakers from the people who would have done Project 2025 will say we need to cut the funds because it's not doing the kids any good anyway. And as I'm listening to you, I can hear the reverberations. That's why we're going to cut the funds, because they're falling further and further behind. And what the lawmakers, I call them lawbreakers, but anyway, the lawmakers don't seem to understand, or don't want to understand, is that many kids in our neighborhoods, they don't, the parents don't, many of the parents don't have the time, I guess, to spend with them, to work with them on the homework, because they got to do those jobs, and they got to go to jobs where they are underpaid, where they experience wage theft. So they are made to work extra hours without getting paid extra, and they have to do it because their choice is to not do that and get fired, which means that they would not be able to support their children. And the law makers are not, they don't consider that. And I need for our people to understand that dilemma, because we can get sucked into that. So many people, we talk about Black capitalism, that's a whole thing. But as you get higher up on the economic spectrum, you can lose your perspective. You can lose your groundedness and how it is that we come up. So this is all very good, and the funding is important. So yeah, we still have problems, but if they take the funding away, which is what they want to do, and siphon those federal dollars to private schools and religious schools, our public schools, which they don't want anyway, are going to suffer, and our kids then are going to fall further down the rabbit hole. So they say, so Project 2025, for instance, it calls for eliminating the Office of Head Start. So when I read that, I was heartbroken, because I can remember, hearing testimonies of parents who said that Head Start helped. Why? Because when their kids were little, they had to go to work. They couldn't stay at home and do all the stuff that they needed to do. But Project 2025 calls for eliminating this Office of Head Start, which would affect about, this is as of today, 833,000 low-income children. That's a lot of kids. And this is what I know. And y'all talk back. You guys, and you guys, ask your questions in the chat. Ask your questions. But how do we deal with that? How do we communicate how critical this is? If 833,000 kids today are in Head Start and they're going to be affected, that number is going to go up. How do we communicate that to our people so that they understand how vital and how important this is? Either one of you can take that question.
You want to take that, Karen? Sure.
Sure, I was waiting to see you. I think for me, looking from my perspective, I think it's always parent advocacy is very important to me. And I think our parents need more information. It needs to be broken down into bite-sized chunks that they can understand. I can remember sitting in special education meetings, and the parent would come to the final meeting of the year, particularly in high school, and they didn't know their child wasn't making the grade and they weren't going to graduate. Parents aren't staying informed enough. So how do we make it easy for them to participate, particularly now after COVID, when we can hop on Zoom for a conference? Could it be that we can galvanize our resources and partner with other community organizations to reach out to parents, to perhaps it's creating other marketable items. Even, for example, Grandparents' Day was Friday. Many districts had Grandparents' Day. How powerful would it have been if we were to partner and been at schools around the country on Grandparents' Day, giving them tools and information about Project 2025, how it would impact, so that they would know exactly what's coming up. A lot of our parents aren't even paying attention to what we're talking about tonight. And so how do we make this relevant for them? And I think it's meeting them where they're at, meeting them at the schools, meeting them in their communities, and sharing with them this information so they know what decisions they need to be considering and need to make.
I'm looking at one of the comments. Reginald Williams says, I'm lifting up parents who don't have the time and suffering from wage theft, but promoting an indoctrination system. It will not educate our babies. And that is absolutely true. So So we're like between a rock and a hard place because the parents are definitely behind the eight ball. And the system is working as it has been intended to work, right? It is not, it's not that the system is failing. It's working as it is intended to work, and they want to make it work even better. That's what Make America Great Again, I think, calls for. So there has to be some type of, if I'm wondering, Reginald, you can write it in the chat. Do we want to just not care about the loss of funding, or what would be the way? Because I understand what you're saying about how promoting an indoctrination system is not going to help educate our kids. That is the truth. But in this system in which we are caught, when the people do have to work, and I'm listening to you, Dr. Bradford. Some of them are not interested. Some of them not. They're too tired to be interested. But we still have this system. We still have this system that we're caught in. So what do we do? Do we say, well, I don't care about the Department of Education being broken. I don't care about us not getting the funds. What do we do? And anybody can answer that in the question, or one of the two of you can answer that as well.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you raised that, and such a great point that Reverend Williams raises up, because that's coming to mind too, of when you look at the data, you're right that the system is failing our kids in a number of ways. And yet it's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? It's not an all or nothing. It is to acknowledge that the system needs to be better. So it is working for our kids. It is not, some say blow up the system, some say reform the system. There are lots of different opinions on this, and I could have a whole dialogue myself about it. And sometimes I want to do both or anyone at any given point in time. But it is to acknowledge the need for resources to make it work for our kids, number one. Second is, up until now and for the foreseeable future, we've always had to supplement our educational experiences. So I think that does not go away, but that also makes the money for community-based organizations and funding like after-school program all the more critical, because to your point, Reverend Sue, the system is operating the way it is intended to, and yet to throw it out or not have any supports targeted towards our kids is worse than the current bad situation, if you will. And to the question of states picking up the lost funding, I'm also glad that that point was raised, that the proposal or the manifesto is quite explicit about giving the money to states and local communities instead of it being centered at the federal government. So to some degree, it's not the money going away, but it is, to a large degree, I should say, it's not the money going away, but it is in the form of what's called a block grant, where the money would be given to the state or to the local community, and they get to decide. That would be fine if we thought that our state leaders had the best interests of our kids in mind. And if you think about some of the states and you think about the map of the states and the diversity of opinion, particularly when it comes to some of these ideological issues, that scares me to death, that they get to choose. We can see it happening now where the Department of Education US is not responsible for curriculum. And what are we seeing happening in places like Florida? Banning the books. So you can only imagine, with even more money in their hands and more discretion, what will not happen or what will become undone if the department went away. Because some of the references to bureaucratic tape or coming with loopholes, some of those regulations are really intended to ensure that the bad actors aren't behaving worse than they already are. In other words, don't cut funding because you have federal funding that's happening, or make sure you pay attention to students with disabilities. Make sure you're doing something when you find that there's an achievement gap between your white students, your Latino students, and your Black students. That's some of the red tape that's referred to in the manifesto, and what that red tape is really intended to do is to pay attention to our most vulnerable.
Yeah, and I think that again, the whole document is intended to make or reinforce the belief that the system was made to protect and serve a certain group of people. That's, I mean, that's just the reality. But Paul Weyrich said, he was called the father of modern conservatism. He said, we don't want everybody to vote. He actually said that out loud in a convention some years ago. We don't want everybody to vote. We don't want everybody to be equal. We don't want that. This is exactly what they want. So the clarion call is, what do we do if we know that these things are in motion, and they are in motion right now? All right, we don't have to wait for an election for some, because they're pushing these policies through right now. So what do we do when there's so many things that are being sewn through the fabric of our whole society that are going to affect us? And I think, and y'all push back, but I think that we as African Americans, um, maybe we've relied too much on a government that has not really cared about us. Can we say that? We have relied too much on, we have believed in the goodness of the laws, and that, if it's a law, it's going to help us out, and that's not the case. So then what do we do? This probably involves a changing of the way we think, but we also need money for what we're going to do, for what we need to do. So it's not a cut and dried thing. One of the things that in Project 2025, it says that the National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as the Nation's Report Card, and they say that it should release performance data based on family structure. So now this is not just, and there's something that's going to affect people of color, it's going to affect people of different sexualities as well, right? In addition to existing categories such as race and socioeconomic status, the project argues that family structure is one of the most important, if not the most important factor influencing student educational achievement and attainment. The document goes on to endorse natural family structure of a heterosexual two-parent household, because all children, this is a quote, have a right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. Now, then what does that do to us in our communities with our kids, who are not only kids of color, but they're in a non-traditional family structure? What's going to happen to them? Talk back to me, please.
My fear is, when I think about those two particular factors, we don't necessarily have the best supports in our Black communities to support students who fall in that category, because we discriminate against students. And I'm saying we, collective we, or I can just isolate the educational system. I've seen it happen with my own eyes with children who don't come from a two-parent man and woman household, isolated, bullied, and all of those types of things. And teachers are proponents, and they're hopping on and bullying along with the students. So we've got a lot of work to do, not just at the programmatic stage, but also at the grassroots in the classroom. How are we changing or shifting the paradigm with the individuals in the classroom, with our administrators in the classroom, with our communities, who sometimes silently support what we say we're against?
Maybe the solution is that a lot of people will say that integration was not good for Black people. It was not good for Black people. It was not, because it just was not. So maybe the solution is that on an emotional and a spiritual level, we let me back into this. When I heard somebody say that they wish that Black athletes would not, the football players would not go to the white schools, go to the Black schools. If you're going to play for somebody, play for you. Maybe it takes us stripping us or ripping ourselves away from the system that we have leaned on for so long, and just pulling away, say, hey, we can do this. We don't need you. We don't need your money. Is that a realistic thing? We don't need your money. We can do this if we plant the seeds of well, the seeds of our ancestors, even, that, we can do this. We got where we are, I guess, without federal funding. I'm going to put it that way, right? We got where we are because grandma and them and great grandma and them in those places where they were made sure that their children and their grandchildren got the education. They did not depend on the system. Is that something maybe we should be thinking about, just kind of, we don't need you. We don't need you. Is that realistic? Is that unrealistic?
So I have an opinion here, and I think one of the things I've noticed about the Black community is how creative we are. We are perhaps the most creative people I've ever seen. Sometimes when I go into, I'm in another city and I'm going through the community, I'm like, man, we are so creative, and if we can put that to use to solve some of the many problems and create economics for ourselves. Like, wow, where would we be? Do we need the system? No, but should we leverage the system? Absolutely. Those are taxpayer funds,
Absolutely.
and we give to that, right? That's our money, collectively speaking. And we do need money to do this work. We do need money for food. We need money for books. We need money for our teachers, our educators. So we do need the money. We can't fund it on ourselves, not when we're paying Caesar. So we may as well leverage Caesar to educate our kids in the way that we know how. And I think we also have an opportunity to create new models of education and new models of what it looks like. And that, I think, is where our biggest opportunity is. How do we educate our kids for the 21st century and what is yet to come? That's where our creativity and that's where our know-how, our knowledge and expertise really comes into play, so that we leverage the system to our benefit. There are ways to follow laws that don't put anyone in jail, yet get an outcome that maybe was not intended to benefit us. So that, I think, is the work that we need to do, and how
Absolutely.
we leverage the system, while yes, not solely depending on it,
Right,
but making sure it works for us.
right. Dr. Bradford, you have anything to
We
add to
have
that?
Yeah, I was gonna say we have some great examples of that, right? I scroll through Instagram. There are lots of millennial teachers who are leaving the classroom and starting their own micro schools, and in addition to homeschool. So that's the creativity that we see happening now. And those that are younger, I know than me, that they are really amplifying their voice in this season by taking the reins and saying, no, I don't want to teach in a public ed classroom anymore. I know what's best for this particular grade or this particular set of grades. I'm going to pull them out and I'm going to start my own little small academy to do that work. And I think we have some great models that are really coming up that we could really, like Tyra said, but really make those, how can we replicate that nationwide or in pockets and pilots and see what works, and then create a system of micro schools or a system of, even with the homeschools, the Black homeschool network is really expanding these days because parents are choosing to, those mothers who are working at home, they're saying, well, I'm going to, not only am I going to work from home, but I'm also going to teach my child at home. So we have some different creative models that I think that we can look at. And those of us who have the network, right? That's currency right there. We tap into not only dollars, but our networks, and be able to create these partnerships so that we can be creative to look at how can we do education differently to support our own, but yet use taxpayer dollars wisely, I think is also a great option.
Yeah, I mean, it's super important. They want to take away money that we depend on, but we should leverage it for home-based childcare. They don't want childcare the way it's been. They want it to be home-based. And the plan says that funding should be prioritized for home-based children rather than universal daycare. Now, for a working parent, how does that work, and how do we use our creativity, and how do we leverage the system when it comes to something like that? Because that's going to hit a lot of people smack in the nose. How do we do that?
And those are, the question was for our, not universal childcare, but the home-based,
Home-based.
correct?
Yeah, because
How
they
do
don't
we
want
expand
universal,
that?
they don't want universal
Right.
daycare anymore. They don't think it does any good.
I'm not as familiar with that particular area. I do know that there are lots of home-based childcare out there, but the impact and how it looks and how it can be expanded, I know it can. Definitely a great place, right? A success gap for us to explore. What are the possibilities of us being able, what does it look like currently? And how can we take what's working in home-based childcare and expand it?
See, the problem is, and that's good stuff. The problem is that is all of this is work, and we don't want to work. You know, democracy is hard work, Christianity is hard work. We don't want to work, and this is work. This is battling against the system, the leveraging. It's a lot of work. This thing says that funding for this home-based childcare would include money for parents to stay home with a child or to pay for familial in-home care, and that would be appealing to some early childhood advocates who've long called for more resources for informal care at home. Well, what if you can't do that? I mean, I really want us to
I say,
figure out.
who benefits from,
Yeah,
benefits
yeah.
from that? Who's able to do that?
No, but I mean, that's for white folks. That's for people who have money, not just white folks. So people who have money, but for the people who, are living, paycheck to paycheck, that's not going to work. What I'm afraid of is that if we're not aware of what's at stake, we won't even begin to think differently about how we're going to handle what's in front of us. Do you hear what I'm saying? That we will just kind of lope along and everything's going to be okay and nothing's going to change. And we got this little bit of something, something, and we'll hold on to it. And then we will realize too late that that something, something has been snatched away. Then what happens to our kids? I mean, that's the thing that I worry about all the time. They talk about on-site childcare too, where you take your kid to work. How's that going to work?
Right.
I mean, how's that going to work? I mean, I don't even know. Um, so I'm just wondering if all of us who are in this conversation begin to think of some of the creative ways that we can begin to think about how we go forward. If the Republicans get into office, they are going to do this. And like I said, they are already working on doing this. So what then do we need to start talking about in our communities and in our churches so that we can open up the eyes and the minds and maybe spark and inspire somebody to begin to help us think things differently? Anybody?
I mean, I think you have just described that quite frankly, which is regardless of who's in office come January, there's still work to do, right? It's a matter of are there headwinds or tailwinds? But it will require work nonetheless because of the conversation we were having a little while ago, which is the system is designed to work as it does, and it is not working as a whole for our kids. Some of us make it, many of us don't. And so, one, I think we need to remember that. Two, aside from voting, and I would also just add, I'll make a plug here on the voting, which is we pay so much attention to the presidential election as we should, and not nearly enough at the local level,
Right.
which is where things like ban the books is happening because of who we're electing at the local and state levels. But it also requires activism of demanding something different. And then it requires leveraging funding, whether it's philanthropic, but more government. There are many funding opportunities that are not taken full advantage of to create those systems that we know can, will, should work for our kids. So I think it's also becoming aware, using a network effect for those of us that understand how government funding, for example, works, becoming aware of those opportunities, being successful in applying. Those are some of the opportunities that exist. And then again, continuing to create those models and using forums like this one and others to share what we're doing, similar to what Dr. Bradford did on the homeschooling. What are we doing in different places? How's that working and how do we replicate it? So it's just doing more and more of those solutions, leveraging not only our own dollars, but the Caesar's dollars.
So that's good. So you're talking about how the activism that when you push back at the system, you are pushing against the system does not go move. I mean, that's why Dr. Dent said she doesn't think that it's fully true that people don't want to push back. And that's right. People do want to push back, but people get tired, and not enough people are doing the pushing back because it is exhausting. The more you push, the more they push back. And and they've got, the resources that we don't. So the activism and the mobilization and the organization, all of that is extremely important. But here's where we're in a real pickle. Let's say that that administration gets in and they're doing all this stuff and they want to have this stuff done in 180 days. That's the whole mandate. In 180 days, they want to have completely transformed the system as we know it. One of the things that's included in Project 2025 is eroding our rights. And we have a uniform or a unitary executive. Why is this important? Because one of the rights that they want to pull away, erode, is the right to peaceful assembly. You can be arrested under this for peacefully assembling. You can be put in jail. So that's going to be an intimidating thing for people who want to fight like we've always been able to do in the streets. Not only do they want to arrest you, they want to quiet your voice, and they want to have the president, the executive branch, be in total control of the police department, and the police departments would then have the authority to gun you down if you're third world country stuff. So we have to think about that too. So then if our First Amendment rights are that's why this is so important for us to know, if our First Amendment rights are taken away, that speech, religion, assembly, press, and all that, if those are taken away, which they want to do, then how do we organize, mobilize, and push against the system that wants us right where we are?
I think one of the ways that we'll have to do that and do better at is technology. We resist technology to a certain extent in our communities. And when I listen to you just read it, because I read that, and when I listen to you read, state it and recall those, what they plan to do, how else are we going to communicate? What, that would be the easiest. We know that that's one thing that we always talk about in education. What's the easiest way to reach out to parents and reach out to grandparents? Their cell phone text blast. I think I saw someone say that in the chat. And so, that's one way that we can reach out and connect with each other to be able to push the work. Because that's something that's just readily available. We're using technology all day long. And so if we are in fear of, or we're trying not to engage in negative ways where our Black boys are going to be jailed for protesting or wanting to advocate for us, well, we're going to have to find ways to really support our seniors who still love paper and pencil, but we're going to have to really support them, support some of the, different families, like intergenerational connections, and ensuring that we make good use of technology.
Okay. Tyra, you have anything to add to that?
I don't.
Okay. For teaching about race, all right.
Actually, I do want to go back to one thing,
Okay.
Reverend, you said earlier about laws. And I would argue we do need laws. And then we have to work to enforce the laws,
Have to do it.
like
Right.
Voting Rights Act, Civil
Absolutely.
Rights Act, Emancipation.
Right.
So what we saw is that the law existed, so it created the wall, the barrier, the guardrail, something for how things were supposed to be. But then it took the activism, it took the work, and yes, people are tired, but freedom isn't free.
Right.
And so I am just hearkening back to your earlier conversation about the laws and the need for it. that yes, we do need it. And so we should leverage the system and make it work for us, and then be creative when it doesn't, while continue to work that it be changed to work better for us. So sorry, it's a really delayed comment. But one that I just remembered I wanted to say from your comment earlier.
And that's good. That's important. The pushing back the work of justice. The work of justice is what people don't want. That's what I was referring to, Dr. Dent, that people just don't want to do it. And it's scary. For some people, it's just totally scary to get out in those streets and push back. But that's how anything has gotten done. And that's why they want to chop it off. They just want to give us. So we have to. Somebody said in the chat that we need more conversations, and Proctor is actually working on part two of this project and forming a group of people that will be working across disciplines, sociologists, historians, religious and all that, to have conversations so that we can produce our own policy document. Dang it. We've come this far really without the system. We have the system, but not really have the system. We've come this far. We can do a whole lot more, but it takes strategy and it takes planning and not just being still and saying, we're going to kind of go along to get along, but because that's not going to work.
Yeah. The
So,
other thing I would add to having worked at the federal level and local level is I would often say I thought of it as a three-legged stool, but we needed policy, we needed advocacy, and then we needed programs or practice. And so the policy was one thing, but you needed to implement it. And then in implementing the work or doing the work of education, for example, you identify opportunities where policy needs to change because of the unintended consequences or intended consequences, like the war on poverty or the war on drugs, for example. And the advocacy was always there to create pressure and to draw attention to things that needed to be paid attention to. And none of those things can exist in a vacuum, and we all have our part to play in that. So even to your point of like needing to get on the streets, yes, and we need people working on the policies.
right,
We need people
right.
being educators. We need everyone to play a
Sure.
part, multiple parts, depending on what your capacity is. But I wanted to acknowledge, having been in federal government, that the pushback, the whatever, that squeaky wheel, like pick your metaphor, right? That thing that was telling us that it wasn't right or we needed to do something different is how change came about. And I think if we look back over the history of this country, we can point to the same thing about freedom. It's not given, it's demanded. And so I wanted to
Right.
just highlight the role that is necessary for the kind of change that we're talking about. Yes, the election is obviously one part of it. We got to get there first, as I saw someone in the chat say, we got to do that. And we've got to play in some role of the puzzle.
Absolutely. And I think, and it's important, again, if we go back to the role of churches, many, when we do work with churches, kind of saying, you need the Bible studies and all, but you need classes and we talk about financial literacy, we talk about education, we can talk about, strategize, political strategies, all of that. People are beginning to talk about that needing to be a part of Black church life. Very, very important. And we need to have, I think, because organized people are stronger than organized money. And there's more people of color than there are, the others, the non-melanated people. And I think of the system as kind of being a bully. And bullies are, they get in your face until you get back in theirs, right? Until you call them out. And the picture that I always refer to was during the movement after Mike Brown was killed. I think it was after Mike Brown was killed. It's that young sister. She looked like she had maybe 20 years old. She was small little thing, just standing face to face with the police officer in the riot gear, and she was standing there, like defying him, like, what are you going to do? And I think that we have the capacity to stare the bully in the face. And we have an advantage of kind of knowing how the system works. And so we know the elements of the bullying that we are going after. But I think it's very important for us all to realize that we as a people, or organized people, are much stronger than organized money. We're rolling down, but I just wanted to say this to them. Project 2025, it's so anti-multi, that doesn't sound right, but they're anti-multi. They don't want brown people, black people, women, LGBTQ. They don't want any of that. They just want white folks. And really, it looks like they just want rich white men, if the truth be told. They don't really care about even the white women. They don't care. It's just so it leans so much. But anyway, when it comes to about race, it says, Project 2025 elevates concerns among members of the political right that educating students about race and racism risks promoting bias against white people. Everybody take a deep breath. Lord Jesus. The document discusses the legal concept of critical race theory and argues that when it is used in teacher training and school activities such as mandatory affinity groups, it disrupts the values that hold communities together, such as equality under the law and color blindness. What in the world? Dr. Bradford, speak to that. What does that bring up in you when you hear that?
The last school I served at in Alexandria, Virginia, we had to do a book study that year because the district took on with the superintendent. He did not want to, he wanted to be an anti-racist, if make sure I got that term right, district. And so we had to participate in mandatory training and have those uncomfortable conversations about diversity and inclusion and belonging. What does that mean for us as teachers? What does that mean for us as students? And it was hard conversations because we had racist teachers who they flat told us, I don't want you in my classroom. I don't want to teach with you. And this was only 4 or 5 years ago. And so I think we have a long way to go. There are lots and lots of resources that are already out there that can support these kinds of conversations. Many come to mind, but I think we have the groundwork and the foundation to start the work with what's there and continue to support the conversations in education around what does it look like in different pockets of the United States, because it looks different in the South than it does in the Pacific Northwest than it does in New York City. And so I think when we look at the different dynamics and the different environments, that we need to take all of that into consideration when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion and belonging, and really thinking about what does race really mean to us and our students in our classrooms in this day and age.
Yeah, listen, racism is not going to go away. America's not going to be healed of her. It's not going to happen, right? It's just not going to happen. So we don't have to worry about that. What we have to do is worry about our power and claim our power. James White in the chat says that we were once slaves without any power. And I'm going to say we were slaves and they thought we didn't have any power, but we had some power because that's how we got out of it. But he says we are so much better positioned today to fight back, and we are. We just have to believe it ourselves. We just have to believe it. But he says, Mr. White says, Black sisters have always led us as we were fighting. Well, yeah, Black sisters were, but so were the Black men. They don't get as much credit as they because those brothers were working, they were getting slaughtered. They were getting slaughtered. Brothers must now stand up, he says, and lock arms with our sisters. But I think that's been happening all along. When you read about what these guys did, these men did, they didn't care. I mean, but there was a community there. There was a oppression, and the cruelty made a community, right? It's like what happens when there is a natural disaster. People band together, most of them. Some people are never going to do it, but people band together because at the end of the day, the humanness of people kicks in. And so if we are able to just within our community, just band together, have conversations in church, have conversations, just talk about it. Just, he ain't trying to make you, just talk about it. Talk about, you know, and here, schools in the churches, if you don't want to teach us, Tom, Betty, Susan, we can teach them in our churches. We have an independent spirit. I think that is the result that is evidenced by the fact that we made it out of enslavement in spite of the effort to keep us in. We made it out, and we're not going back, as Kamala Harris says. And somebody said in the chat, even if Kamala Harris gets elected, this plan is still going forward.
That's right.
It's still going forward.
I
So
also
we absolutely have to talk about it to people. And because on the streets, I talk about it with people and they say, I didn't know about that. I was at the dentist office. You would think you got 400 degrees. And I talked about Project 2025. This guy said, what is that? So many people are saying this. So we have to have the conversations, number one. And then we have to have the sit down sessions where we strategize on how we are going to get around them. Because at the end of the day, they are not God. That system is not God. We have a God that brought us thus far on the way. I don't know. Anybody have anything else to think about that? To say
Amen.
about
I'm just thinking amen, Reverend.
that?
But I think the other thing and what I would add is because there are so many things to fight and so many things to pay attention to. And yes, we need strategy. We forget the
Absolutely.
strategy.
Absolutely.
And or some people don't know that for that matter, but there is a strategy that is necessary and part of it. And I've seen things in the chat from ways to participate of be an educator, run for office.
Mhm.
Where do we need our best and brightest? And I'm for one that says, nothing about being a legislator looks attractive. It makes me want to run to it. And yet I think that's why some of these seats are being filled by people who we know are not the best and brightest. So there is effort underway, for example, to attract some of our best and brightest to run for office. For example, how do we get more diversity? I was reading over the weekend, I think it was in the New York Times, about the number of places that have seats that go unopposed where there's really no competition and there's really no choice because no one's running for office. So that's one thing that come to mind. Of there are multiple ways for us to participate. I think the second thing is for us, because again, there's so much to fight, is to go back to Dr. Bradford's point about the use of technology, that we don't always have, it doesn't always have to be in masses, that we can really leverage technology to make a whole lot of noise with
Mhm.
a bit of effort. And so we should be thinking about how we can use technology strategically to do that work. And then again, to continue to have conversation about it, whether it's, I was talking to my brother last night, telling him I was going to be doing this panel tonight, and I wasn't sure he knew about Project 2025. And so I use this as a way to tell him about it in the event that he didn't know. And so I think, to your point on just having conversations and making people aware of what's at stake and what is happening, not just what's at stake, what is happening, to the chat comment of this is going forward regardless, is absolutely correct. It may not be eliminating the Department of Education, but it is chipping away at our democracy that we have seen and will continue to see as part of that. So again, larger point is just thinking about there are massive ways, there are any number of ways to get involved, including just having conversations.
Absolutely. We are winding down. This stuff, if nothing else, I'm hoping that for the people who are here, it's making you think about it. I hope that it's making you curious about what's in the plan. We have to know. Somebody asked, Mr. White asked on our next session where there'll be a planning component. These sessions are informational. That's all we're doing. The planning component is part of what the Proctor conference is planning to do after we've gotten people educated. We're not just going to have these conversations and say sayonara. No, what we really do, those people that did put together Project 2025, they've been working on it for 50 years, number one. They've been working on it with every Republican administration. They have one of these mandates for leadership, and they've been working on it. And they have been having conversations with a cross section of people, religious leaders and politicians and historians and economists. That's exactly what we need to do. And we need to sit and strategize. Unfortunately, with many people, no matter your ethnicity, when it comes to churches doing that, people say, oh, I don't want the church to talk about it. But Jesus was an activist. I'm just saying, Jesus was he pushed against the system. And so, and he pushed against it because the system back then, as now, was not on the side of the people. So that's what you do, strategize. And you can do that in your church, and churches are a really good way to do it. So we will be having, we are forming a group that will be continuing to do that. We'll be in touch with people who are interested in doing that. But for right now, this is what I hope. I hope that you will go out and tell people about Project 2025. I need for you to talk about it because many people still do not know. If you go over to Starbucks, and you're getting your a cup of coffee, talk about Project 2025. I'm guaranteeing you that there are a whole lot of people who do not know. That's number one. Talk about it. Talk about what happens, the rights that we may lose, in addition to women's reproductive rights and all that kind of stuff. There's so much we stand to lose. That's number one. Number two, tell people, as Tyra alluded to vote down ballot, just to vote, because the local elections are so important, and you can get whoever you want in the White House, but if you have some schmoes on the local level, then you've done nothing. So who's on the school board, who's on city council, who your state representatives are, and the judges, we can see what's happening now. The other side has figured out how to use the system to get the judges to do their bidding. We got to be that smart and smarter. So you have to talk about that, talk about the down ballot, talk about the judges, and then start to have conversations with people to see who might be interested in doing this work, the further work that we have to do, so that we are not in a position ever again where we are reacting to their stuff, but we are being proactive with our stuff and have them have to react to what we're saying. Because you know what? We've crossed too many bridges, and we've done too much. We've come too far. What does the song say? We've come too far for us to give it up now. I'm not turning back, not doing it, because we've worked too hard. And so that is the lesson for this evening. Dr. Bradford and Tyra, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for coming in, and if you guys, somebody said, will this video and others be like it? Yeah, that's going to be available. We're making all these videos available, and we have a toolkit that's going to be coming out, I think, this week, that we are going to be distributing. So if you want the toolkit, and in the toolkit, we talk about some of the elements of Project 2025 and even some talking points. So if somebody says da 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 da, you say da 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 da, so because people are overwhelmed, I think, with what's going on. But please have the conversations. Please have the conversations. And again, thank you, Dr. Bradford and Tyra. I am so grateful for what you have provided to us. If somebody said how we get the toolkit. If you registered for this, we have your email address. We will send it to you. That's how we do that. That's why we ask you to register. So, and then you can share it. Listen, share it. It's not just a Proctor thing. Share it. I've had Jewish people and people the Somali community. Can we get the toolkit? Anybody who wants a toolkit, you can get the toolkit, because you know what? This is about us as a people in this country. So yeah, everybody can get that. So I want to thank you. I want to remind you that the Proctor Conference is coming up in February. We're going to be in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so I think you'll be able to register beginning tomorrow. But put it on your calendars. Let's just claim we're going to win this election. I'm going to claim this so that we get there, we can celebrate, as opposed to, crying on each other's shoulders. But that's going to be Monday, February 16th through Thursday, February 20th in Little Rock, Arkansas. And like I said, you can register beginning tomorrow. And also, if you want to invest in the work of the Proctor Conference, you can do so. You can go to our website. You can go to our Cash App. We have a Givelify thing. They're going to put a slide up because I don't know all those things by heart, but you can give that way. And I always say that it is an investment. You're just not giving. People think, you're doing somebody a favor. When you invest, you expect a return, right? So we're asking you to invest in our work. You can do the conference sdpconference.info/legacy-fund or Givelify. You see the link there, or our Cash App. So please feel free, because you know what? All the stuff we're doing takes money, but we're going to do it, right? We are going to do it. So, Reverend Damien, are you on? Would you like to say? There you are.
I just want to offer a quick thanks to Reverend Tab and to Reverend Sue for their leadership, and thank you, Ms. Tyra Mariani, who of course served as a co-chair for the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Board, as well as a trustee member for years. So good to see you, and thank you. And Dr. Bradford, thank you so much for sharing with us on tonight. And we are grateful that the Proctor Conference brings competent and conscious and committed presenters like we had tonight to make sure that we are getting the specifics correct in order that we can continue to spread information to our networks, to our communities, and to our churches. And of course, Reverend Sue, just reiterating that ministry that is extensive, of course, has a price tag connected to it. So we, of course, continue to solicit your prayers as well as your support by continuing to give to the Proctor, the work that the Proctor does, the work that the Proctor Conference does, as this is the first of 3 conversations this month. So Reverend Sue, please remind them the other conversations that we'll be having this month a part of this critical conversation series. But again, thank you all so much for joining us from all over the country. And again, special thanks to our wonderful presenters who shared with us on tonight.
Yep, thank you for reminding me of that too. Yes, next week, next Monday, we're going to have a presentation on what happens if the Department of Health and Human Services goes away. Really critical conversation. And then our last one is what happens if the Departments of Justice and Defense are eliminated. So, and what we tried to do is pick out the parts of the government that are on the chopping block that we thought were most important and most critical for Black people. So plan to come next week, plan and tell your friends, and if you don't do anything else, have some conversations with people. I'm not fooling. If you are in an Uber, talk to somebody. If you're in the Starbucks, if you are in Macy's, I don't care where you are, have conversations with people, because I'm guaranteeing you, when I have conversations with people and they say, what is that? And I start to tell them, they are flabbergasted and they don't like it. They don't like it. This is part of the work of democracy that we're talking about. So we need for you to do it. So thank you, Tyra. So good to see you. So good to see you. And Dr. Bradford, we just met for this project, but you brought a wealth of information, and the people in the chat are really grateful. I'm grateful. So thank you. Y'all have a good night. Have a good night. You can sleep tonight, but get up talking tomorrow about Project 2025. Y'all take good care. Bye-bye.